Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez. This is Interviews from Quito, the program where we explore the big challenges facing this country and the region. In today's program, we take a look at new opportunities of business in Ecuador as New Zealand seeks to bring its technology to our land. The nation seeks to work on cooperation in agriculture with small farmers and larger companies to develop resources in Ecuador. To discuss that, we have Steve Jones, Regional Director for Latin America at New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. But first, let's take a look at this video.
New Zealand has put its eyes on Ecuadorian agronomy, especially on the dairy industry. The NZTE group is developing programs to transfer technology to Ecuador and help small and medium companies to grow. This project looks forward to improve not only the situation of small producers, but also the economy of the country. How does this work and which are the goals of this project? Follow our analysis.
So thank you very much, Steve, for being with us.
Pleasure to be here, thank you.
So tell us more about this technology transfer agreement between New Zealand and Ecuador that you're trying to reach.
So we made an exploratory visit to Ecuador in March this year and met with various contacts within the government and the agriculture sector. And out of that initial visit, we identified two projects that we worked on collaboratively. One was on the conversion of whey to ethanol, and the other one was on the cooperativism model in New Zealand and the Commodity Levies Act, which our Ecuadorian contacts felt were relevant to Ecuador's own development objectives.
And what is the role of NZTE, the company that you work for, and how does that work with farmers and businesses in Ecuador?
So New Zealand Trade and Enterprise is the New Zealand government's trade and investment promotion agency. We work with New Zealand companies to help them internationalise their business and grow bigger, better, faster for the benefit of New Zealand. Now, the companies that we're working with here in Ecuador are all agri-tech companies at this stage, and they have technology solutions that can help improve the productivity of Ecuadorian dairy farms.
And is there any budget specifically allocated for that purpose, or does it depend on both different countries or their governments? How does that work? How do you put it into a table, into a project?
Sure. So there are projects which involve companies, and we will collaborate with the companies to help them promote their technologies at major events like the Holstein exhibition here in Quito this week, and we will co-fund the company's participation costs in those kind of events. The projects I mentioned earlier were funded by our Ministry of Primary Industries, and that's essentially a government-to-government collaboration where we see that New Zealand's interests and the Ecuadorian dairy sector's interests coincide, and we can assist by transferring some of the knowledge, some of the research, and some of the technology experiences that we've had from the New Zealand situation into Ecuadorian conditions.
And you've worked with other countries as well, so how does that compare, at least in the region, Colombia, other countries, Brazil? How does that compare our system, our industry and theirs as well?
Well, so that's a really good question. The New Zealand dairy pasture management farming system is based on very sophisticated management of pasture technologies. That's grass seeds, that's the growth rates, that's the use of electric fencing to manage pasture. Now, those are all core technologies to the New Zealand system, but that system has to be adapted to the particular conditions of each different country. So the conditions in New Zealand are unique to New Zealand, conditions in Ecuador are unique to Ecuador, conditions in Chile are unique to Chile. No two farms anywhere in the world are completely alike. So the work that we do is really to help our companies understand the environment, the growing environment in each market, and then work with partners on both sides, both the New Zealand side and the host nation side, to tune, if you like, the New Zealand system so that it actually becomes a localized system using some core New Zealand technologies.
And what are those main changes that you've seen that you're going to have to make in Ecuador? Because you said there's no two same countries at least in the terms of agricultural development.
That's right, that's right. So, well, first of all, it's all about pasture. So pasture is about grass. It's about seeds and it's about types of grass and forage or fodder that generate the most energy for the animals that are feeding on it. Secondly, it's about the genetics of the animal. It's about the efficiency of the animal's ability to convert the pasture into milk. And the efficiency is a product of management which is helped by the use of electric fencing. So a farmer becomes very scientific about pasture growth on the farm and then uses electric fencing to manage the pasture. So on one particular day, this part of the pasture will be used for feeding the animals, and when that grass length gets to a certain height, then the electric fence will move on and the animals will move on to a next section. That pasture will have a chance to recover, and so it's about rotating the animals around the farm to maximise the productivity and therefore the profitability of the farm.
So New Zealand actually sees the agriculture sector in Ecuador as being able to receive all that technology, all that information, and prosper and put it into work in their own fields?
Absolutely, and it's not just in very large-scale farms. So we've been doing some projects in Colombia, for instance, with quite small farms with say 5 cows on the border with Ecuador. And even simple changes in farming practice, in the introduction of new animal husbandry techniques, as I said, some genetics and some pasture varieties, we have tripled the incomes of farmers who have got very small herds.
Can you tell us more about those experiences? I'm very interested in knowing, for example, what a farmer in Ecuador says, well, I've been farming my whole life, my whole family has been farming, but now I know different information that might help me improve my produce. So
on the core technologies, there's obviously a lot of research into the management of particular farms. And we found in New Zealand, we went through a very painful period in the 1970s and the 1980s when the UK, which was our primary export market, joined the EU. And we had to find other markets to export our products to. And in the course of doing that, we removed all subsidies. So by 1984, there were very few subsidies for the New Zealand farming system. Right now, it's the least subsidised agricultural sector in the world. Farmers then had to move away from traditional practices, which were no longer economical, and invest in new farm management practices that maximised the natural assets that they had available to them. The mindset that enabled them to do that is transitioning from, if you like, cultural memory to a very scientific approach to farming. And that's what we think has helped the farmers that we've been working with in Ecuador, and we think that that's equally in Colombia, and that's equally transferable to Ecuador.
And who can participate in these programs? Do you need to be at least have a web page for your company, or can you be just someone that has a couple of land hectares in the highlands or in the coast in Ecuador? How can they apply to be part of this program?
So right now, the best way to find out about the system is, if it's possible, to come along to the Holstein exhibition this week and talk to some of the companies who are present there. As part of our ongoing dialogue with the Ecuadorian government, we're thinking about the ways in which we can make the knowledge and the information about the systems that have been working in Colombia available in Ecuador. So that's part of our longer term strategy.
And can you tell us more about this Holstein fair? Who participates? Who can attend?
So farmers from all over Ecuador are able to participate and attend the Holstein Fair. It's the largest agricultural trade show for the dairy sector in the country. It's the first time that New Zealand companies have participated in the show under a New Zealand Pavilion banner. We have 6 companies, including seeds companies, genetics companies, electric fencing companies, and general agricultural supplies companies. So the full range of technologies is available there, and I'd encourage any interested farmers who think that this might be a system for them to come and talk to the companies and the experts, the technicians who are at the Holstein exhibition.
And we discussed, at least on the part of the farmers in Ecuador and in the countries that you work with, but what about New Zealand? What do they get to earn from this project? What are their perspective going forward in the longer term?
In the longer term, it's the potential for the Ecuadorian agricultural sector to adopt systems that are based on some core New Zealand technologies. And as as the initial demonstration sites prove the value of that technology, we expect other farmers to say, well, hey, maybe this is a system that I can adopt, and they'll be purchasing more New Zealand technologies as a result.
Indeed. How many companies are participating, and at least a bit more on how they apply to come to Ecuador? Have they done it in several other countries, and what was the experience there?
So there are 6 companies. They're all currently represented in Ecuador by various business partners, either joint venture partners or distributors. All the core technologies are here at present, but part of the exercise that we're going through now is to really educate the dairy sector here about the wider New Zealand system and how to integrate some of those technologies to achieve those productivity gains.
And what have you seen, or at least your partners in several countries, that Ecuador might be lacking? We have, as you said, the cultural knowledge, maybe the richness in our land, but what are we lacking?
At the moment, I think there's a bias towards an American dairying system, and whilst that's a very efficient dairying system, there are lots of very high-cost inputs into that system, and that may not be the optimal system for Ecuador. So it's not so much that anything in particular is lacking in Ecuador. In fact, the conditions in Ecuador are optimal for pasture-based farming, but that might mean the transition from a type of animal that's optimized for an American system to a type of animal that's optimized for a pasture-based system.
And what about the obstacles? Do you see any obstacles maybe on the legal side? Are there too many laws that prevent this or that from happening? Or there's not enough information, there's not public services available for people? Do you see any obstacles going forward with this project here in Ecuador?
I can't speak to any regulatory obstacles because I'm just not familiar with the environment here. It's more the culture. So the traditional way that farming is done it comes from generations of practices, and the application of science to those practices is always can always be challenging to people who say I've always done it this way, and may not be willing to change the way that they've done things to a method that they believe is untried. So probably the work that we're doing is to demonstrate that there's clear evidence for the benefits of a change in system, and that's the work that we're doing.
So tell us about also you mentioned the ethanol that was part of the project. How would that work? Because there's not a lot of information or development into that specific area, at least in Ecuador. We focused a lot on oil production, on whatever is derived from the oil production, but not so much in ethanol. Can you explain to us a bit about that as well?
So whey is a byproduct of dairy processing, and it produces a large amount of material which could be classed as waste. And there are processes to convert that whey into ethanol. There are some plants in New Zealand that are doing that using a system that was pioneered in the 70s, and there was strong interest from the Ministry of Agriculture in understanding the technology and the research behind that. So we were able to bring one of the New Zealand experts from a university who was a specialist in this area to Ecuador to make a study of the processing sector here, understand the volumes that were available, and then make some recommendations about how that might be commercialized.
And as I see it, maybe I'm a bit confused here, but it might also help with the climate change issue, because a lot of the processes that we've been doing as a country might not have been climate friendly enough. Do you see any comparison there that it might change in promoting protection of the land, of the water, the resources as well?
So without giving you specifics, what I would say is that care for the land is core to New Zealand values and the New Zealand farming systems. Now, we haven't always got it right, but right now there's an enormous amount of research going into the way that we use the land to ensure that we're meeting our climate change obligations. And farmers, of course, are right at the heart of that, because they are more in tune with their own environments than maybe many of the rest of us who live in cities.
And what have you learned from at least their experiences, the farmers' Ecuadorian experiences? Because it's not only from one side, it's not like Ecuadorians receive the technology from New Zealand and we learn and we become better countries and that's it. You also get some feedback from the way farmers in Ecuador are working.
Yeah, so we've heard of some really interesting projects with some of the smaller producers here in Ecuador, particularly women farmers in indigenous communities who have traditionally been keeping cows as part of a domestic economy, and companies like El Ordeño are working with them to actually become more efficient, more productive, produce surpluses that can be sold and processed. So there's a development agenda here. It's not just a kind of a for-profit large corporation industrial model. There's also a social enterprise, local community and family development model here as well, which can be facilitated by the New Zealand system.
And also focuses on development of the economic system as well. Small farmers, small households that are living along the border, as you said, between Colombia and Ecuador. How do you see their development, their economic development changing with this?
So we see it bringing real benefits to them. Greater productivity means more disposable income, means access to opportunities that previously weren't available to them.
And what are the main companies that could work with this project? We've discussed ethanol and land farming. Are there any other areas that we could be looking at that maybe we didn't look before?
At this stage, as I said, we really only had our first visit in March. We had a follow-up visit in May, and now this is the third time we've come here. So we're really building our knowledge of the Ecuadorian system. It's beginning with dairy. We could see that there may be opportunities with horticulture in due course, and then beyond that into other types of technologies. So right now we're also interested in medical devices. A big leap from the primary sector, but certainly an area where New Zealand has some world-leading technology. We'll see how it goes.
And that was exactly my next question. What are the other areas that could help develop here in Ecuador? Because if you can give us at least a bit of an idea of how the agriculture sector in New Zealand, the medicine sector, what are the main areas that are exportable material?
So we tend to work with, in most other regions in the world, we're working with food and beverage companies. But because Latin America is a large productive continent, we're working with quite a different profile. So a lot of the companies that we work with in this region have, if you like, technologies that can deliver productivity gains. We see that initially in the agriculture sector. We see a lot of it in the mining sector. So we have companies with assaying technologies, software, geophysical mapping technologies, which is obviously very relevant to many countries in Latin America. Health is relevant anywhere in the world, and in particular value for money in a health system. So those are the key areas that we've started on. We also are very interested in the software sector. It's a very innovative sector in New Zealand, and there are applications from New Zealand software developers in all kinds of areas, from fintech, obviously, to health tech, to retail loyalty program, proximity marketing types of technologies, fleet management, telematics technologies. So we're interested in understanding more about those sorts of sectors.
So many of the farmers and companies in Ecuador, I assume so, are also looking forward to expand their businesses even outside New Zealand. Do you see any relation there with New Zealand having maybe a cooperation agreement with, for example, the European Union, Asia? How can they expand to other horizons?
So New Zealand's trade strategy has been built around market access. So New Zealand's been negotiating free trade agreements with a number of different markets around the world. China was a very large one. The CPTPP is another very large one that was recently signed off and is in the process of being ratified by countries in Latin America, such as Mexico, and it's currently before Peru as well. Chile was already a member of the P4, which was a predecessor organization. So the core of our trade strategy has been around market access. once we have market access, of course, that then gives us the ability to export products and services to new locations. We don't want to be a commodity producer, a price taker. We want to command a premium because the conditions that products are grown in New Zealand are pristine conditions, and therefore we think they can command higher prices in those markets. We have an industry, the kiwi fruit industry, which has focused very intensively on developing new varieties of fruit, different colours, different taste profiles, different keeping profiles, which means that we can command much higher prices for our kiwi fruit in markets than other kiwi fruit producers. We've also seen Zespri, which is the kiwi fruit company, working with growers in other markets like Italy to produce off-season products as well. So one thing is market access, another thing is a marketing strategy that can enable you to command a price premium.
And according to what I know is that you've had more experience in the dialogue process, the whole process to get to this point where we're talking at this moment. So can you talk to us about more about what you did as part of the dialogue with the government? How does it come from just an idea to actually being a reality in countries like Ecuador?
It starts with people-to-people contacts. So when we came here in March, we were welcomed very warmly by a person who had studied agribusiness in New Zealand, and that experience had stayed with him. And when he heard that we were coming to visit Ecuador, he was very keen to meet with us and give us not only a warm welcome, but a really clear insight into some of Ecuador's agricultural sector development agendas, and also introductions to various ministries so that we could begin the process of a political dialogue.
And at the end, it's also about these connections that you find with people that want to work towards a better world at the end, because that's what having a multipolar world, an international system is made of.
That's correct. It starts with people. People get together, start generating ideas. The ideas that we discussed in our very first visit in March were of interest to our Ministry of Primary Industries. That was the agency or the government ministry that funded the research projects that have occurred since then. This visit, we now have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, along with ourselves, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and the Ministry of Primary Industries, all visiting together. The growth in the linkages with different parts of the Ecuadorian commercial sector, the agriculture sector, and of course government agencies, will see the relationship between New Zealand and Ecuador strengthen over time.
And we do hope that continues growing for the well-being of both New Zealand and Ecuador.
Thank you. Well, that's very much our intention.
Thank you very much, Steve, for your time.
Thank you.
So we've been talking to Steve Jones, Regional Director for Latin America at the New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, about the economic and technological opportunities for both New Zealand and Ecuador. Thank you for watching. This is Interviews from Quito. I'm Carla Gonzalez. Until next time.